Well, good afternoon, and welcome again to our continuing study in 1 Peter. And today we'll be continuing on in the second chapter. We'll be looking at 1 Peter 2, verses 9 and 10. Now, as you recall, on Monday, Peter had really proclaimed Christ as the cornerstone of the church and us Christians as the living stones, or the precious stones, the work stones, and that the church was actually a living body. Well, now today, Peter's going to tell us about the glory and the function of the church. In fact, the church starts to replace and fulfills the role of Israel from the Old Testament. So let's go ahead and read verses 9 and 10 again of 1 Peter chapter 2. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellence of him who called you out of darkness into the marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. So as we start to look at this, we want to look at our then principles. And in verse 9, Peter refers to the church really as a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession. Each of those phrases can be found somewhere in the Old Testament, particularly in Exodus and Deuteronomy when the law was first being given and the Israelites were wandering in the desert. Right. But there's also references in Isaiah and in Malachi. And someday you may even want to take a look at all those references. But I think a better than principle really is if we were to look at the passage in Exodus 19, verses 5 and 6. And there, God is saying to Moses, "Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be my kingdom of priests, a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel." And so you can see how Peter has now taken those words from the Old Testament, from Exodus, and now delivered them to the church as we are the new Israel going forward. And so Peter is announcing these great promises which God made to his people Israel and are now going to be fulfilled by his people in the church, in his church. Now I want to start looking at these passages a little bit as always. Now again, this passage was really kind of hard to separate then and always principles. So we're going to take a look at some principles here that kind of apply to both categories. The first principle I want to look at is that we are called to be a royal priesthood, much as Israel was called to be a kingdom of priests. Now, priests were always supposed to be the mediators between the God that was being worshipped and the people. Right? And so those priests represented the God and they acted like the God. So if you wanted to see how the God was to act, you would look at the priest. Or if you needed to communicate with the God, you would look to the priest. But we are God's priest. We're a royal priesthood. So we are that mediator. We have direct access to God. And since we do have direct access, we are responsible for bringing others to God. Now, God created man for fellowship and communion, and his desires are being fulfilled when he is with a redeemed and holy community. And that is us. And our responsibility is to bring others into God's house, into our temple, that we are all part of and are the temple. I think now we take a look at verse 9, in the last part of 9, it says that we were being called out of darkness. We've been called out of darkness into his marvelous light. And then in verse 10 it says, "Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy." And so here's a really good always principle, is that everybody is someone in God's kingdom. Before, you weren't anything, but now you're in God's kingdom. You are a child of his. And then Peter goes on and talks about the mercy. Well, there's a lot of mercy in God's kingdom. And certainly in the pagan religions of the first century, there was not a lot of mercy by the gods. In fact, fear kind of dominated those pagan religions. But with God, there is mercy. Now, Christianity is not only a religion of righteousness and justice, but serving God, there is a lot of righteousness and justice. But also when we serve God, there's all kinds of love and mercy, which God demonstrated on that cross those 2,000 years ago. So now I invite you, did you see any other then or always principles? Let me know. Email me. Send me or leave a comment. And now, how does this apply to you today? What's God laying on your heart? How is He asking you to serve Him as a royal priest? Let me know. Come back on Friday when we finish up this kind of section here. We'll look at verses 11 and 12. And until then, go with the peace that only He can provide. Go now with Christ's peace, Christ's mercy, and Christ's grace. Amen.